Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Borroloola is a community 1,000 kilometres almost southeast of Darwin in the Gulf of Carpentaria and home to 4 of the language groups, the Yanyuwa, the Garrwa, the Marra and the Gudanji peoples, and all those who've made Borroloola home in terms of non-Indigenous families who've moved there, other First Nations people, and it is a very beautiful place in the Gulf of Carpentaria. But this time last week, Mr Acting Deputy President, this time last week families in Borroloola were called to a room in the Borroloola School, and they were called to that room on urgency by staff from Special Envoy Tony Abbott's office, by the Army and by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. They were called to that room and they were told in that meeting this time last week that, do you want houses here in Borroloola? Do you want houses? Because if you do, we can bring down 12 houses to you. We can get it on a truck or we can send it down to you, but we need to know now, and we need to know because we want to get those houses down here straight away. Now let me tell the Senate about the people of Borroloola. They have been waiting 10 years for $15 million from the federal government to provide houses. 10 years. And in that time, people have been living in extraordinarily overcrowded homes. Children, parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, 20 people to a house, to a room. So when they have this offer that comes to them, where they have to sign on the dotted line quickly, no questions asked, never mind that those houses are former defence houses that have been sitting by the side of the road for 4 years, that were deemed unusable, no opportunity to really ask questions. Are these houses safe? Can these houses make the distance? Are they going to be permanent homes? Who's going to help with repairs and maintenance? Who is going to own it? Who's going to put it up? None of these questions were able to really be discussed. A month ago, the Special Envoy Tony Abbott flew into Borroloola and he was humiliated by the people there when they reminded him on 2 occasions that A, we didn't know you were coming, and B, we don't have problems getting our kids to school. And I understand he did say to some of the elders there, when they said, our biggest problem is housing, we've been waiting for 10 years and nothing's come. And he even said, according to the elders there, well, kids should be going to school. Even if they were living in caves, they should still be going to school. So this offer, this supposed offer that's come from the federal government, has suddenly gone quiet. A week later, none of those families in Borroloola have heard anything. They don't know if those houses are still coming. They've had no one communicate with them again. No one's bothered to ring up, fly in and say, how are you going? Is this what you want? Dead silence. Despite numerous attempts to find out from the Commonwealth Government what is going on, from the missing in action Indigenous Affairs Minister, who's doing nothing about housing in the Northern Territory, even though $550 million is there for the Northern Territory to sign up with the federal government on for future funding. None of that is happening. And yet it's the people who are most impoverished in our regions of the Northern Territory who are suffering at such an alarming rate, more so because of the appalling chaos of this government. Who's in charge? Is it the Indigenous Affairs Minister, or is it the Special Envoy, Tony Abbott? Did he just come back to Canberra and then go into the Prime Minister's office and demand, I need millions of dollars to go back and see that 12 houses are taken down to the remote community of Borroloola? Why? Not for the people of Borroloola. Maybe it's about, fixing up pride, ego, the humiliation that Tony Abbott felt when he went into the community. This is not about respect. There is no dignity in any of this. This is not an engagement with First Nations people in a respectful manner. This is all about power. Those who have it and making those without it feel degraded, despaired, hopeless. And that's what you're doing when you show no respect whatsoever in a conversation that is absolutely vital to people who are homeless and living in conditions that are absolutely third world. Lift your game. Who is in charge? Is it the Special Envoy Tony Abbott? Is he now the Indigenous Affairs Minister who happens to have the ear of the Prime Minister, who can suddenly click his fingers and get these houses moved? And yet when we start asking questions, when Labor starts to ask questions, when the people in Borroloola start to ask questions, everything goes quiet. Nothing is happening. So please, Minister, Prime Minister, Special Envoy, what are you doing? How much are these houses going to cost? When are the long-term houses going to be built for the families of Borroloola? In the Garrwa 1 camp, the Garrwa 2 camp, the Marra camp, the Yanyuwa camp, the subdivision. When will you talk to the people of Borroloola in such a respectful way that they can define and determine what they want with the money that is rightfully theirs and has been there, sitting there, and doing nothing? The ineptitude of the Minister for Indigenous Affairs and now the meddling of the appointed Special Envoy is continuing to cause chaos and neglect in First Nations communities. The Indigenous Advancement Strategy is treated as a minister's slush fund. We found out during estimates he granted nearly $500,000 of IAS funding to 3 Northern Territory non-Indigenous industry peak bodies. Minister Scullion said the funding was for just the legal fees effectively, but we now know it's not. The NT Seafood Council has been very clear that they don't want to use their grant to pay legal costs. The Cattlemen's Association want to use some of theirs, as does the Amateur Fishermen's Association, to fund cross-cultural awareness courses for their members. Of course, as part of the land rights process, these organisations have a right to argue detriment, and this is taken into account by the Aboriginal Land Commissioner. But there is a process under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, section 54C, that provides for funding of legal representation in detriment cases. So why wasn't this process used? Why did the minister decide it was appropriate to use IAS funding money that is meant for the expression, engagement and conservation of Indigenous culture to fund detriment cases in land claims? After I first raised this IAS funding issue, I received a message I'd like to share today with the Senate from a New South Wales woman. And she wrote to me and she said, "I'm so disheartened by this because as I read that story, I knew this was the same funding which had been cut from my daughter's primary school, Maclean Primary School in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. This school has at least 25% Aboriginal students, the majority of which are Yaegl. This is also the school I went to as well as my mother. We are proud Yaegl women, and for the last few years they had been teaching a wonderful community-endorsed Yaegl language program. They've not been able to continue teaching this year due to the original funding from the IAS being cut. The cost to run such a program is roughly $18,000 each year. $18,000. And yet you can go and give away $500,000 just like that. This school in New South Wales is desperately seeking funding, and it's not the only story. There are many examples coming in from around the country of organisations, individuals who feel and are questioning what is going on with the Indigenous Advancement Strategy, what is going on in Indigenous affairs under this government. Who is in charge? Who is in charge? Is it the Indigenous Affairs Minister, Nigel Scullion, or do we have another Indigenous Affairs Minister and Special Envoy, Tony Abbott? Where is the Prime Minister in all of this? Who is making the decisions? Because you're not having the respectful engagement on the ground with First Nations people. And the people of this country are sick of it. The people of Borroloola are sick of it. Lift your game. People desperately need houses. Don't play with their lives like this.